Coming up, Cam Thomas's offseason transformation turns heads at Nets training camp. Is the fifth-year guard destined for a career season? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'm going to be discussing Cam Thomas's upcoming season and how a new offseason regimen could set him up for success. Today was the start of week 2 of Nets training camp. And as is the case every training camp, this is my 4th season on the Nets beat and the NBA beat. And every season, there's at least one player who comes in looking drastically different from how he did the prior season, at least from a body perspective. This year, the most jarring example is probably Zion Williamson, who has been renowned for being overweight and out of shape, and then comes in and looks pretty almost unrecognizable this year. They're like jokes circulating. He looks like the guy from Captain Phillips. And, no coincidence that that's during a contract year for Zion. But there's been several Nets also who look drastically different, from a body standpoint than how they did the prior season. And I'd say the most significant example is Cam Thomas, who has come into camp looking very slim compared to what we saw last season. And last season, obviously, injuries and durability were the main storyline of Cam's season. He played only 25 games, which it was somewhat of a contract season with him entering restricted free agency, really hurt him and probably prevented him from getting any kind of significant contract if that contract was going to be on the table. So he came in this year and he looks like he slimmed down a fair amount. And we got to talk to him today at Nets practice and ask him about his new physique. And this is what Cam had to say. It's just something I wanted to do. My last 2 years, I wanted to put on a little more weight, try the strong, bulky route. I mean, it was cool. I never liked how I looked, though, honestly. The results were still good, but at the end of the day, it's about how you look and how you feel. So I feel and I look a lot better now. We'll see how it goes this year. So that was the quote from Cam Thomas, slimming down. He said that it was an emphasis, like this isn't something that wasn't like a calculated decision. He wanted to lose weight. And naturally, when people hear that, I think they are going to relate it to the hamstring injuries, him needing to be in better shape, him needing to be able to prevent those types of reoccurring soft tissue injuries. And so we asked him about it, if that was a product of his hamstring injuries, him needing to, slim down or wanting to slim down. And he said, quote, "No, it's just something I want to do, just me being me, wanting something I wanted to do, not really related to the hammies, just something I wanted to do." So Cam, denying that this was related to the hamstring injuries or a product of that. But I will say, I'm not buying that from Cam Thomas. Like, I think that this probably was something where him and his team, the Nets, his, personal trainers or agents or whoever evaluated and said, you're carrying all this extra weight and we need to do something to try to prevent these injuries. And we asked him about it at the end of last season after he suffered his 3rd hamstring injury. I mean, Cam suffered 3 hamstring strains, to the same leg, which is like hamstrings are often a reoccurring thing and, tough to get right. But the Nets, I'd say, were pretty cautious, every time he heard it with bringing him back, especially during a tanking season. And those injuries just continue to reoccur. And despite that, he said that he didn't feel, at the end of last season, when we asked him, he said he didn't feel he needed to reevaluate anything from a training perspective and that they were just kind of like freak injuries or just bad luck. And it wasn't a product of any of that. And, he comes to camp looking like he lost weight. And we asked him, how much weight did you lose? And he said, a good amount were the words that he used. So I think it's fair to read into that and say that this was a situation where he felt that being in better shape and all of that was going to help prevent these reoccurring injuries. And that's something that he really has to do. Like, there's more. Last year was important because it was kind of a contract year, as I said, entering restricted free agency. But this year, he took the QO. It's the ultimate bet on, yourself type of move. And he really obviously is in a contract year where he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So staying healthy is going to be one of the most important things. And I definitely think that this was a calculated move that he feels will help him in that regard. And it should help him in that regard. Like, I'm not a kinesiologist or, an expert on physical performance or anything like that. But I do know, from my past experience as an athlete, when you are a little bit overweight, maybe you put on some mass and then you're trying to do things, from an explosive or like a twitch perspective that you were accustomed to doing before, there's going to be a risk of some soft tissue injuries there. And that seemed to be the case with Cam last season. But outside of just the injury perspective, I do think that this should also help Cam from a performance standpoint and what he's able to do on the court. And he said that he wanted to put weight on. And I think that there are benefits to adding weight, but I think there are also some drawbacks. And I think some of those were pretty evident in how we saw Cam play last year. Like the 25 games that he was available, he still played well, from an offensive standpoint. He had a career high season in points, scoring the ball was around 23 points per game, was above league average efficiency despite taking 18 shots per game. But I do think that there were some differences in his efficiency and how we went about it. Like you look at the rim attempts and being able to get downhill, and Cam still did get to the rim at around the same rate, but he shot 57% at the rim last year. That was the lowest since his rookie season, and that was in the 30th percentile among combo guards. And look, Cam's never going to be like an all-world finisher as a guy who is 6'2", 6'3", but I think with this added weight that he was carrying, I think you saw that it was a little bit more difficult for him to get to the rim on a consistent basis. I don't have any stat to track this, but from the eye test, it seemed like the blow-bys were way down. And when he did get to the rim, it didn't seem like he had the same kind of vertical pop. And that's pretty noteworthy because Cam's not a guy who's known for his vertical pop or explosiveness to begin with. Like he's not a guy who's getting up and dunking over people or anything along those lines. But I think earlier in his career, when he was a little bit, lighter, especially his rookie season, I did think you saw more explosiveness towards the rim and him being a little bit, finishing up at the rim. Whereas this past season, I think that he was finishing below the rim a lot of the time. And I think that was, exemplified by his numbers. As I said, 57% at the rim, lowest since his rookie season. And, I do think that it was kind of noticeable, like the added weight. I think that on the defensive end of the floor, it also probably didn't serve him well. I think he looked like he was, Cam's pretty much often uninterested on defense. But I think last season you saw him really like taking breaks on that end of the ball. And he was asked to do a lot offensively. So that definitely plays into it. But I think that there were moments where it looked like he was trying to kind of like catch his breath and he was a little bit, it looks like he needed to have a little bit better win physically. And a lot of that is the fact that, he played his first set of games, then suffered the hamstring injury. Then you can't really recondition, you're just nursing back that hamstring injury. You come back, you need to work yourself back into shape, another hamstring injury. It was just a bad cycle. But I think it would be pretty implausible to say that the added weight that he intentionally put on and, the added pounds that he was carrying played no factor in, those hamstring injuries. I think that that's something that you definitely could draw a connection to. And I think that him dropping this weight is a positive from how he's going to play, on the court, and then also just an injury prevention standpoint in what is going to be a very important season for Cam Thomas. And in that contract season, we've had a lot of discussion this summer about what is going to be the best route for Cam to maximize his earnings, what he needs to improve upon. Got to talk to Jordy Fernandez about that. So we'll touch on what Cam needs to improve upon, what fans should be expecting, and more when we continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets podcast, talking about Cam Thomas's upcoming season and his offseason body transformation, and Cam entering what is going to be one of the more interesting situations that you're ever going to see, with a noteworthy player like himself taking that qualifying offer on a tanking team that, the goals aren't exactly married together of like the Nets are probably going to be trying to lose games or definitely going to be trying to lose games. Cam Thomas is, a player that based on how the Nets handled it, I've said I don't really envision them bringing back, but yet he's still going to need to perform. He's still going to need to have a featured role and show what he can do in order to maximize, his next contract. And also the Nets, as I said, being in that tanking season, don't have too much of an incentive to, feature Cam and play him over some of these other younger guys who probably are going to be on the team long term. But despite that, everything that we've said and heard, everything that we've heard from the Nets has been that Cam is going to have a starting role at the beginning of the season. They're going to feature him, it seems like, just how they have in prior seasons. And in the beginning of the year, he's going to get a shot. Could he perhaps change the Nets' mind? I mean, Sean Marks did not close the door on a Cam Thomas reunion after this season. And one of the things that he did allude to was saying that Cam's, hamstrings and him being hurt last season really obviously hurt him in negotiations. So I just, based on comments Sean Marks has made, don't think that he's like a Nets kind of player. But if he stays healthy and he makes improvements in a lot of areas, maybe he can change the Nets' mind. Like, I don't think that that's going to be the case, because I think Cam wants a certain type of contract and a certain amount of money. And I just don't think the Nets are ever going to want to give that type of money in this new CBA to a player with Cam's limitations. But maybe they can kind of bridge the gap and come closer. And, the way Cam's going to do that is by improving in some of the areas that we all know he needs to improve, but that the Nets want to see him make strides in this coming season. And I got to ask Jordy Fernandez at practice today, the areas where the Nets want to see Cam improve. And this is what he had to say. He said, first, he was very complimentary of Cam's passing and said that he thought he saw development in that area. And at the end of the year, Cam had a few games that were, really encouraging from a potential assist and assist number. And I think we know, what he's talking about, that Chicago Bulls game, which was the last game of Cam's season. He had a career high, I think it was 10 or 11 assists, and looked really good in that regard. But then what Jordy said about improvement areas, he said, quote, "The thing with CT is teams can decide to try to get the ball out of his hands early or late. That's where he has to trust the spacing and his teammates. I think his game can evolve in that way. And then defensively, his effort, I want it to be more consistent, more physical. He's been great at this training camp. His body looks great. He's done a really great job this summer. So I'm expecting to see a new CT and a better CT." So there you have it. And, I think that that's not going to come as a surprise to anyone. But I think anytime you can hear a coach like Jordy Fernandez be somewhat candid about the areas that a player like Cam Thomas needs to improve, it's noteworthy, because you ask these coaches a lot. I've dealt with numerous coaches since coming onto the Nets beat, and a lot of times you get coach speak, you get, really non-specific answers. And there, Jordy Fernandez saying, we want to see Cam be more willing, as a passer when he's getting double teamed and things along those lines. And also defensively, he wants his focus, his engagement to improve. And those are the things that I've said, going back to the beginning of this offseason, talking with people about, where is Cam Thomas going to need to improve to get this next contract? Where is he going to need to improve to kind of fit the Nets vision or any NBA team's vision? And a lot of people are so focused on the scoring, like, oh, like Cam's going to come out this season, contract year, he's going to cook like 25 points a game and whatnot. And like, sure, I think Cam can do that. And I do think that that will help his contract case. But I've also said that if Cam comes out and he scores at the same level with the same level of efficiency, and, the passing is still, a tick behind where it should be in terms of willingness, and then the defense is still really bad, I know for a fact if he does that, he's not going to be a Net next season. And I also would posit to say that I don't think that he's going to get the significant contract that he wants anywhere else. And, I asked Cam at Media Day if he feels he has to make any changes to his game or his approach to secure the contract that he wants. And he said no. But I think that, despite him saying that he can see the writing on the wall somewhat in areas that he does need to improve. Does that mean that he's going to make those changes? No, like once the bullets are flying and once he's in those game situations. But I would be remiss, to think that those thoughts haven't entered his mind. There haven't been discussions between him and his camp and him and the Nets or whoever. And he made a change already with losing the weight. He didn't want to admit that the weight was an issue or the weight was a, factor in him getting injured or not doing some of the things that he wanted to do. He kind of termed it into like a body positivity issue of like, I didn't like the way I looked, but I think we all know that it's a performance thing. So he made that change. Maybe he'll make these other changes. And if he does, I think that it could be a really encouraging Cam Thomas season. I mean, I've always said that the Cam Thomas scoring ability is tantalizing. He is one of, I think I'd say, a top 15 most talented scorer in the NBA. And if you can add, a little bit more willingness as a passer, if the defense, I never think he'll even be an average defender, but if they can get to a point where it's just not like really, really bad, and he's giving more consistent effort, if he's able to sustain that effort through being in better shape, I think that that's all pretty encouraging. And I'm excited to see how Cam Thomas plays at the beginning of the year because, despite some, gripes I've had with his game in the past, I do think that some of these things are correctable. Like we've seen him do it in spurts. And if he can do that and you couple that with his scoring ability, I think he could be a really intriguing player. So, it's exciting, from that perspective of Cam dropping the weight. Hopefully he'll be on the court a lot more consistent. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, man. Like, there obviously is the gap between, Cam Thomas, how he views himself and how the Nets view him. And I ultimately don't think it will end in a reunion, but him, being able to bridge that somewhat or bring people a little bit further towards, believing in him would be a really cool development to see. And I think he's somewhat done it. Like I talked to Mike Scotto on a previous pod, and Scotto talks to a lot of people throughout the league and has said, like, in the past, when you ask people about Cam Thomas and the prospect of him being like a big money guy, they were like, no shot, like he's ball hog, all this and that. And I think that still is the consensus around the league. But I do think he's had flashes where at least maybe just like a few people, he's been able to sway them a little bit in that direction. So if he can continue that trend, I think that it would ultimately be a positive for him. But I do think there still is a long way to go in terms of improvement as a facilitator, improvement as a defender, and the ability to kind of flip that mindset and do it consistently and make that like an everyday part of your game. So we'll be excited to see. We have a few other Nets players who made offseason body transformations, and I think that they will play a significant role in changing what those guys can do on the court and potentially what they could be with the Nets moving forward. So who are they? What should fans be expecting? I'll get to all that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Guys, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Guys, Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've ever put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, you ever think you were saving a certain amount and then realize you're coming up well short? Monarch can identify why. It helps you notice an inefficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. It can help you maximize investments, increase your savings rate, and easily review finances with your partner and or financial advisor. It can help you keep a clear view of your financial health week to week and long-term. Guys, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about several Brooklyn players who have undergone offseason body transformations. I touched on Cam Thomas at the top, and another player who I think had the most significant transformation is Noah Clowney, the third-year forward. And you look at Noah, and he looked like he's added a fair amount of muscle this offseason. Noah played last season at around 220, maybe a little above, and he's weighed in at training camp at 235. So appears to have added a fair amount of muscle based on the numbers. And you look at him and the eye test really, looks like it matches that. The, upper body looks a lot bigger. So that's obviously going to be a positive for a player in Noah Clowney who came in 2023 with that number 21 pick and was a little bit of a tweener between the center and the power forward. And the Nets made the decision after playing him for a while in the G League Long Island at center, decided he's not going to be a center. He's too small in that regard. He's going to be a 4 in the NBA long term. And they played him at the end of his rookie season and this past season at power forward. And despite moving from center to power forward, there still were, glaring deficiencies from a physical standpoint and his ability to match up with the physicality that NBA bigs offer. That NBA bigs offer on a nightly basis. It was a struggle. And I think a lot of that was showed up in his play style and also kind of led to, making his deficiencies in terms of his skill set more glaring. And when I say that, we all know that Noah is, a three-point shooter offensively. Like that's the top thing that he brings to the table. He was around 39% from three on like 5 attempts per game through the first half of his games last year before suffering his ankle injury. So I am a believer in the shooting, But putting the ball on the floor, doing things off script, driving to the basket, being a decision maker in that regard, were all pretty glaring negatives. And those are things that he's going to have to do a lot more if he's going to play the four in the NBA long term. Like you look at Noah's shot diet last season, he only took 29% of his shots from two, which for a player who's 6'9", 6'10" is pretty unbelievable. He shot really poorly from two. I mean, you look at the numbers, even going a deeper dive from cleaning the class, I got these numbers. Clowney attempted 21% of his shots at the rim last season. That ranked in the 6th percentile among NBA big men, and he shot only 58% on those attempts. And that was the third worst mark among all NBA big men to play over 1,000 minutes. So, there are clear deficiencies there. He's going to need to improve upon that. And I think, part of that is him needing to get more comfortable putting the ball on the floor and just doing some of those things from a skill perspective. But I also think that there was a big physical element in that regard, and him not being able to drive comfortably, him getting bumped off of his spots. I think all of that was, a big area of improvement for Noah. And also, we talked to him yesterday. We talked to Jordi Fernandez about that, and playing off 2 feet was a big emphasis. And what that means is when you get into the lane, instead of just like going full tilt to the rim and, launching off your inside foot as you would on a traditional layup and going up that way, being able to stop, pivot, play off 2 feet, kind of manipulate the defense that way is, a big thing for a bigger player like that who's uncomfortable putting the ball on the floor. That, extra patience and that ability to maneuver that way can go a long way from a decision-making standpoint. And Noah really didn't do that last season. And we talked to Jordi Fernandez, and he said, I think this applies to a lot of players on the Nets roster, not just Noah, that Jordi said attacking NBA level centers at the rim, going off 1 foot, isn't exactly a smart way to go about it a lot of the time. And he wants Noah to play off 2 more. And I think this added weight and this added size will go a long way in that regard, because when you play off 2, you need to be able to be strong. You need to be able to bump people off of their spots and create space to give you that room to operate in the lane. And I think Noah having this extra weight, I think should benefit him there. I think it obviously should also benefit him on the boards and defensively. So, Noah Clowney, this is somewhat of a pivotal year for him. It's difficult to say for a player who's only 21 years old, but it's his 3rd season. He had the encouraging end to his rookie year, then regressed last year, but battled 3 ankle sprains. And this year he comes in, the Nets are going to face a contract decision on him in the very near future. And him coming in and showing that he's able to play and match up with the physicality of NBA level, big men, and also show some skill progression alongside that, I think would go a long way to him solidifying a place, in the Nets' future plans. And I think that right now is still very much up in the air. Last player with the body transformation stuff is Day'Ron Sharpe, who, obviously his size has been a big topic of conversation since he came to the league. Had a career best season last year. I've gone over it numerous times, but defensively was one of the best, defending centers in the league in terms of defensive rating. I think he had the 6th best defensive rating among all centers to play over 600 minutes. I think the eye test matched that. He was really doing a great job, being able to play play multiple schemes and be versatile, whether in the drop, whether aggressively hedging out onto pick and roll ball handlers, which the Nets did a lot of last season, whether being switched on to guys on the perimeter. I think he held up really well in that regard. And he was another guy who at the beginning of last year had a hamstring injury. He's also battled knee injuries. So despite him being, having a career best season last year, really improving defensively, continuing to dominate on the offensive boards, he said at the end of the year that he wanted to kind of get his body under control. He wanted to work, on being more flexible and doing all of these things. And a big part of that was losing some weight. And Day'Ron clearly lost weight. He looks very slim compared to how he did, at the end of last season. So that goes a long way. I've talked to Day'Ron. I've also talked to people in Day'Ron's camp, and there's people that he's working with behind the scenes that are really working on his hip mobility. He's doing a lot more Pilates and yoga and things along those lines. So dropping that weight, becoming more flexible, more agile, I think that, that should continue to benefit him. It should lend him to being able to play longer stretches, which I think he's preparing for after signing this extension with the Nets. I'd expect him to be around 20 minutes per game, and him doing that, sustaining that for a whole season without injury is something that we really haven't seen from Day'Ron at this point. So like Cam Thomas, dropping that weight, I think will help him in that regard. And I think he'll still be able to maintain what he's done, in terms of being a dominant offensive rebounder and the other things. So a lot of changes to some significant Nets in terms of the body of this offseason. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not it translates to the court. But that's all we had today on Locked On Nets. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you got a second, smash that like button, leave a comment. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But we're, gearing up for the Nets' first preseason game of the season. That will be on Saturday. We got a few more practices, so I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.